This week, we welcome Wim Remes, the founder and principal consultant at Wire Security. In our technical segment this evening, Chris Breton from Active Countermeasures explains how beacon analysis is an integral part of threat hunting. In the security news, the Spanish driver who tested positive for every drug on the planet. Vulnerabilities found. I don't know why the off-topic story for this week was first, but it is, so deal with it. Vulnerability found in a remote management interface of Supermicro servers. Apache Struts 2 is being exploited in the wild. How to manipulate Apple Podcast charts, and a whole lot more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Welcome. Does Larry have an introduction? Hi, everyone. This is Paul Asador, and I guess I'm introducing...
Apparently, I no longer do. Wow, and I look short.
So, I accidentally landed in New England and stumbled my way to the G-Unit studio.
That's pretty much how I envisioned it happening, Jeff. Carlos, save the show, please.
Yes, somebody's got to do it.
It cannot be saved.
Well, it's good to have you back, Carlos. Jeff, welcome. Nice to have you in studio.
It's great to be here, Paul. Try to stay awake for the whole episode.
Yes. We've been in studio dropping his phone incessantly. Welcome, Jack.
What? Where? Oh, hey! I'm in the studio with you guys. That's kind of cool.
The average time between being hacked and realizing you've been hacked is 1 year. Can you afford to let an intruder roam your network for that long? Can your company weather the fallout when this comes to light? Black Hills Information Security can find the bad guys in your network and train you to do it yourself. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a hunt teaming engagement can help you find a persistent threat in your network. NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email at contact@netsparker.com.
Like 3 greased hunting ferrets down your trousers, we're ready to bring the pain. It's Paul.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. This is episode number 574, recorded September 6, 2018. And we're here at G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left is Dr. Doug paging Dr. Doug White. Dr. Doug White, please come to the yellow courtesy phone. I don't know.
White, it's a white
It's
courtesy
a white
phone.
courtesy phones are always white.
Yellow
just
courtesy
like Doug
phones
White.
are not for the doctors. They're for other people. Yeah.
What's going on, Doug? Good to have you here in studio.
Yeah, I'm glad you would let me in again. It's after that the restraining order was lifted, everything got better.
And speaking of restraint, Mr. Patrick Lafferty is here with us. I think that was just totally random. No idea.
Whatever works. Maybe we can find the bat phone or something for me. I don't know. I'm also starting to wonder, like, where's Larry? You keep having me here, and Larry's never here.
I get that question a lot. Where's Larry? Usually at a security conference. I'm like, why? Do people think that the RFID tag we implanted in his hand was somehow some kind of next generation tracking device that isn't RFID but lets me track Larry wherever he goes in
Or
the
that
world?
you guys are like attached twins or something?
Something.
Or he's like a quantum shadow that's being cast by you or something like that. So.
He's the bad version of me.
Exactly.
Like in the Rick and Morty.
He was extracted from you.
Extracted. Not that Larry's bad, it's a Rick and Morty reference.
Yeah.
That is a trippy show. If you haven't watched it, good Lord. Also on the lines via Skype, Mr. Jack Daniel is here with us, along with Suffering Bastard.
Hello. Good to be back with you again.
Very nice. That's an interesting setup you have there, Jack.
It is the finest shitty hotel I could score with Marriott points tonight.
Always the optimist.
And I love for those listening on the audio, you got to check out the video and just look at Jack's microphone. If we can cut to that, it looks like a camera tripod, and then on the back of the microphone, there's an eggplant with a 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch mic jack on it. just
Looks like a telescope you could see Venus with.
Smell-o-vision.
Yes, I can see my penis with it. Oh, Venus. Never mind.
What about Uranus? Can you see it? Well, never mind.
Oh, this is just going down already.
Fast.
Let's not waste any time going straight to the gut.
Sorry, Jack.
On the lines via Skype, we also have not Kevin on the bottom in our Hollywood Squares, Security Weekly Hollywood Squares. Security Weekly Squares.
Is Kevin always on the bottom?
It's a
Kevin,
triangle.
It's a triangle of doom. What's up, Kevin?
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me back. And just for all the viewers who are watching on the video, an update on the window situation. We still have a large window here. So we're good.
It's good. We get the window. That's good. I'd be uncomfortable if we didn't, Kevin. Mr. Carlos Perez is here, all the way from a hackerspace in Puerto Rico. What's going on, Carlos?
Hey, Paul. Doing good.
It's nice to have you back. It's been a while. I'm sure Mr. Dave Kennedy's a slave driver over there at Trusted Sec, so keeping you busy.
He's a teddy bear.
Yeah. Yeah, he actually is. He's pretty soft in here. Anyway, Mr. Joff Thayer.
He lost the weight.
Yeah, yes. Mr. Joff Thayer is here with us as well. Joff, welcome.
Good evening. It's good to be here again, and it's great to see Carlos Perez back in the house. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun episode as always. Before we get to our special guest interview, join us for a webcast with Logarithm, tips and tricks for defending the enterprise using open source tools. Oh, wait, that's my open source presentation that I gave once this year at InfoSec World. I'll be giving again for our listeners. So this is an entire presentation that I built for InfoSec World on, using open source tools in the enterprise. The first half really talks about the pitfalls and also benefits of using open source in the enterprise. In the second half is a list of my favorite picks that if you're going to play around with open source tools, here's what I think you should be using. And Logarithm is the sponsor for that. They also produce many open source and free tools as well. We'll be talking about some of those, and they're awesome solutions. So make sure you go to securityweekly.com/logarithm and register today. That'll be happening on September 27th, so you got some time to register for it. On the lines via Skype is our feature interview, Mr. Wim Remes from Wire Security. He's also has 15 years of security leadership experience advising clients, solving complex problems, and doing all kinds of fun stuff in the security community. Wim, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. And Wim, I want to start by asking you how you got your start in information security.
That's always an interesting question. For myself, that was I started in IT as a basically an installer of printers. That wasn't a very fancy job. I moved on to become a system engineer, and when I was working at one of my clients, they had a lot of stuff on their network. They had their switches, firewalls, all kinds of neat stuff that nobody cared about, nobody configured. So I started playing with that and doing that network engineering part, learning all the stuff around the network. I rolled into security. I was working for an integrator company at that time and basically started developing their security services. And that's how I ended up here.
Wim, were these initial firewalls you worked with checkpoint firewalls running on Solaris?
No, they were WatchGuards.
Oh, okay. I gotcha.
Even worse.
So, Wim, you what do you do today? You have your own consulting company. I know you spent some time at in Vendorland at Rapid7 and things like that. But say you have your own company.
So I started Wire Security in actually at the end of 2017. I ran another company before that, working for companies like the IO Active and Rapid7.
Mm-hmm.
But Wire Security itself started around this time last year. So it's basically my anniversary, almost.
Awesome.
What I like doing most is do projects that nobody else wants to do. So people come to me with issues they cannot resolve, and I just dive in and make it happen.
That's awesome. So Wim, you've been involved in penetration testing, in the past, and we've had a lot of conversations about penetration testing on the show. How has penetration testing evolved in your mind, and where does it fit in our security programs today?
Another very good question. Personally, I think penetration testing has very much commoditized over the, let's say, past 5 years. There's also still a market. You remember I was involved in the penetration testing execution standard, which tried to create a framework that was not targeted at penetration testers. It was targeted at the penetration testing buyers. Because one of the biggest issues we still have with penetration testing is that a lot of clients cannot make the difference between a vulnerability assessment and a real penetration test, right? I can give you an example. I had a call earlier this week with a client of mine where I did a cloud infrastructure and application assessment. At the same time, they also had a penetration test done by a local company in Chicago, and I'm not going to name names, but it really pissed me off. They shared a report with me, and in the report were 3 findings, and all were the default things that burp finds when you first hit a website.
Wow.
That's what a lot of clients right now get as a penetration test. No matter the quality people that we have and the quality people that we know, there are companies out there that just run burp for 5 minutes, spend 20 minutes extracting the findings from burp, putting it in a Word document, and 2 days later they send it as the report. That's what's happening.
I saw one like that just recently. I got asked by a client if I would review a pen test that they had paid quite a bit of money for and pulled it up. And basically all they did was hit go, and then they hit print, and they didn't even have any analysis of it. It was just like, it was like, you paid for this? I was pretty shocked.
Yeah, I had a call specifically with this client to talk about that report, and I don't know about you. I feel bad discussing other professionals in this industry, but when we as an industry keep doing that to clients, then that is our problem.
Yeah, and I think, do we need to do either or both of these activities? Do we need to educate the people who are doing the testing to tell them that that's not the way you should do it? Or do we need to educate the clients and say, well, if you get a report like this, you're doing yourselves a disservice and you're not getting the value that you could have? Is it both, or is it just one or the other?
I think we need to educate the clients more. I have plenty of examples. You guys probably have plenty of examples as well. So I've been working in industrial control systems over the past 6 months quite a lot. And one of my clients is running a lot of RFIs and RFPs for new equipment. So they asked me to fill in questions or to provide questions that they could ask their vendors around security of their products. So I came up with a list of questions. Procurement at first was like, they're never going to answer those questions. Actually, vendors answer those security questions diligently, and you get information out of those vendors, and you can make choices based on the security of their products. It's really working with clients, not only doing the technical work, but also working with their sales, with their procurement, with their management, with people that write the RFPs, to ask the right questions so you can make the right decisions. And that's not only for penetration testing, that's for buying blinky stuff from your network. Basically for everything. We need to work with more humans, I would say.
Wim, what were some of the questions that you were asking of the vendors to assess their security posture or approach to security?
So one of the interesting ones was, can you provide what we call now a software bill of materials? And can you also do that after you've updated or changed the product? And we got very interesting answers from the vendors there. What are your security processes? How do you practice secure development? Is there a risk assessment done on your product? there was a very interesting question. Obviously, it was interesting because I wrote it. So when you talk about physical devices and basically ICS, there's a lot of focus on environmental controls. So physical access controls, basically lifting a lid of a lever to switch the system off, that kind of stuff. So my question was, what are your considerations if your physical or your environmental controls fail?
Yeah. Wim, I wanted to go back to the bill of materials. Do you feel people answered that question accurately, or do you feel like there are gaps in building that bill of materials?
The answers that I got back were ranging from yes, we can provide that, to that's going to cost you money.
Wow.
So it really helps you assess how much your vendor cares about not just the security, but the general development of their product.
Yeah, that bill of materials is getting more and more difficult to create. In fact, an entire, as you know, Wim, industry, many of us know, has been created around that. My concern with this bill of materials is, one, it's a moving target, and two, as I include different modules or libraries that may include other modules or libraries, or I use a framework that has plugins like the Node Package Manager, that if one of those becomes compromised in some way or has a vulnerability or is just abandoned by the open source author, those present problems. Wim, I know you've done some work with secure software as well. How do we combat this problem where we're incorporating software and it's really difficult to validate and know what we're including via these add-on and plugin systems?
But I always come back to the Heartbleed example, and everybody on this podcast knows Heartbleed, so I'm not going to go into the details of that. But the fact is that it was a vulnerability in an extension that 99% of the people that used the library didn't need, and you were able to compile it without that functionality and be not vulnerable at all. So the key for me when I talk to developers that integrate libraries, it's know what the functionality that you are needing is. Know all the additional functionality that it provides as well. Consider pulling that out of the software or disabling it, and know what the limits are of the library that you provide as well, that you include as well. In the sense that if you are pulling in a library to do input validation, and at a certain point you find out that it's no longer sufficient, what is your ability to pull it out and replace it with something else? You don't want those single points of failure in your software. So through, for instance, threat modeling, you can think about even a black box binary that you don't know really what is happening inside. You can still threat model what the impact is if you have to replace it.
Is this almost going to be a case potentially against open source? Because what I kind of hear you guys saying is that you really should know the whole open source product inside and out if you're going to use it. And that can take quite a bit of time for you to really learn all the ins and outs of the code. And if you're going to take that amount of time to really learn every possible part of the code and the strengths, weaknesses, anything in there, maybe it'd be faster just to write it yourself?
I wouldn't say that. I'm a big proponent of open source, and I would actually really like to see Paul's talk about open source in the enterprise. I talked about it, I think, about 10 years ago, and there's probably some overlap in what we are saying there. But it doesn't matter whether it's open source or closed source. You're obviously not gonna refactor a whole application because you need one single piece of functionality. It is knowing the risks around the component that you are using. You don't need to know to go through your code line by line. You can also I don't know how familiar everybody is with threat modeling and the practices around that, but there's something that I think it was Bruce Schneider that came up with the idea of attack trees, where you're basically you know what the assets are that you send to a certain product. You know what you expect back, and you define paths for an attacker to compromise those assets, right? And with that, you can threat model anything from an application you fully understand to a black box hardware security module.
Yeah, I also think, Wim, I really think we get hung up on when we talk about threat modeling that we're modeling the attacker behavior, and that isn't necessarily the threat. I mean, I guess you could call it vulnerability an opportunity, but what I want to kind of talk about is in Equifax's example, they implemented Apache Struts, which is some call it a library, some call it a framework, right? But the longer you go without updating that, the more risk you're incurring and the more technical debt that you are incurring. So when you threat model, I think you also have to look at the library you've chosen and understand that if it has a vulnerability, how much work is it to upgrade? And that should be part of your threat modeling, correct, Wim?
I totally agree. Specifically to that question, yes. One of the things we see a lot is people no longer roll their own crypto, and I'm very thankful for that. But they tie into the crypto libraries that they are using, and especially the crypto suits they are using. When I say crypto, I mean cryptography, not crypto coins, just to make sure. And that lock-in into certain parts of your code, certain things that you rely on, that is what you call technical debt, right? There was an interesting discussion I had on Twitter just, I think about 2-3 weeks ago with Chris Weissopel and a few other people, where the idea was, is technical debt bad? In a sense, debt in general is not bad. Debt is actually, when you look at an economy, debt is actually an indicator of a healthy economy, right? So technical debt is not always bad.
But in the financial example, when the debt rather becomes too large, it starts to become a real problem that can impact, well, your personal finances or your business, right?
Yes, but at a certain point, just like I remember the time when I started in security, and I was like, everything needs to be secure. And then you start talking to business people, and they're like, well, we don't have the money to make everything secure. And with that's just the same. Just like you have to understand your general risk posture, you also have to keep track of your technical debt and ensure that your executives know that it is there, and it can become a problem over time, but it might not necessarily be a problem right now.
But we're all going to implement DevOps, Wim, and we're just going to all wipe out our technical debt, and it's going to be pretty much zero, right?
Everybody drink.
Everybody drink. One of the things that needs to be said is we talk about technical debt, and entrepreneurs borrow a lot of money to start their companies, and you have to explain that a certain amount of debt, as Wim was saying, a certain amount of debt is part of what you do. You have to explain that a lot of us think of all technical debt as bad, but really, if you don't ship product, you don't win in the market many times. You just have to know you've got that debt. I think it took me years to come around to realizing that not all technical debt is bad. If you think about things you're doing wrong, but at least you know you're doing it wrong, and you think to yourself, all right, I promise I'm going to hire somebody to fix this someday, and then actually do it, that puts you ahead of a lot of people who don't. And when we talk about debt, you have to remember, how many people take venture capital or start their company on credit cards, and debt is how they get off the ground. So when we talk about technical debt, we have to remember that, especially if we're talking in startups, debt is how they get launched.
Boom.
And some stay there for longer than others.
Some never leave.
And some never leave, yeah. So when you said you might like to talk about the life of a virtual CISO, is that something that you've done? Is fill that CISO role either like remotely or for a shorter period of time?
Yes, I have several clients right now where I work as a virtual CISO. It's a hell of a job. It's I think the biggest challenge of being a virtual CISO is the context switching. I'm working for an organization that is in the financial industry as a virtual CISO, and then I'm also working for a software as a service company in the legal industry. So that context switching and the change of risk environment, the change of how IT is run, the speed at which it is run, the bureaucracy versus the Maverick style. That's one of the biggest challenges I have.
What goes into building that opportunity where clients need a virtual CISO? Like, is it just a temporary thing until they find another one, or do you think organizations can sustain having someone kind of do it in a consulting role like you're providing?
The way I do it, so I don't have I have my own computers, but I don't use my own computers for providing the virtual CISO services. The key is that I do everything on their system. If they find somebody that's suitable for the job, I can basically hand over in a few days. Mm-hmm. That I think is key for me, because you're working on a trust relationship, right? You're working with both their technical teams and their executive teams, and you cannot start profiteering from them in the sense that they have to continue working with you, like you see with managed security providers, for instance. In that sense, I try to focus on making everything transparent and ensuring that they are actually looking for somebody to replace me. I have one client where I've been doing this for about 4 years now, and I love the client, they love me. It's a very good relationship and it works for them. They're too small to have their own CISO right now, but at a certain point, I'm sure they'll come to a size where they can justify a full-time CISO, and we'll all be happy, I'm sure.
So Wim, how do you earn the trust of the team? Both, you said you work with the technical team and the managerial team. How do you earn their trust when you kind of step in or this outsider that's fulfilling the CISO role?
#Wimming. That's what
There's just no other explanation needed, actually.
No. So what I really like to use or introduce with the companies that I work with is a risk management framework called FAIR. Maybe some of you are familiar with it, but it basically splits the whole risk management part between the technical part and a financial business part. So you can have those conversations about risk with the technical guys and go really in-depth technical. You can talk about risk with the business side, with the business guys, and keep it on the money side. And then you as a security professional bring everything together and give everybody in the company the right data, right? I also immediately try to make risk part of the culture of the organizations that I work with. Basically, everybody within the organization, whether you're a clerk or a CEO, you can raise a risk. That doesn't mean it comes, it gets added to the risk register, but we will look at it, we will talk about it, we will assess it, and we will come up with numbers that represent that risk. And using risk as a conversation starter throughout the organization is very helpful.
Wim, what's the most challenging thing about providing a virtual CISO service?
It's being available. Like right now for me, it's midnight. I do calls with my clients depending on the time zone that they are in. It can be 6 a.m. in the morning. It can be 8 p.m. I can be working at 2 a.m. To get something done that a client in London needs in the morning. It's being available. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that because we work with someone that helps us with marketing who was actually featured on a show of Business Security Weekly. He's based in the UK, and like sometimes we're just doing business here, and we're like, we really need to get Dan on the phone. Like I had a question, and he has to, like Wim says, adjust his hours and work those late nights, especially if there's a time zone difference. So yeah, I can see that being pretty stressful.
It gives me a lot of freedom as well, right? So I'm happy to make those adjustments to my schedule. One of the key things in providing this service for me is not ending up in a timesheet mill, if I want to call it that.
Yeah.
So if I have to report hours I've worked for a certain client every month, then I'm not in it. What I propose is basically we assess how much time they would need from me on a monthly basis, and then a percentage gets charged up front. They pay monthly fees just like you would for your firewall manager, right? Because I'm going to manage your security program, and you don't have to care for it. And then for the more mature clients, a portion of the fee is also tied to goals. So we'll, for instance, say we're going to implement a security development lifecycle program. We're going to build a security metrics program. We're going to build a hunting capability. And those goals are measured at the end of the year. Did we get there? Did we not get there? And a part of the fee is tied to goals. And that way I don't have to work with timesheets. And I can adjust my time when you need it, rather than saying, okay, I'm going to be available on Tuesday for 8 hours, and there's not going to be any work for me.
Now, when we talked about using open source in the enterprise, you mentioned you give a presentation on that as well. Do you find that between your clients, are you recommending open source solutions? Are you recommending vendors? And are they the same open source solutions, same vendors, or are they kind of different for everyone?
There are some tools I use that are open source that we always end up using.
What are those? This next logical question.
So we really like to use the Hive. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
I've heard of it. Yeah. What is the Hive?
The Hive is basically an incident analysis platform.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So when you have indicators of compromise, you pull them in. It ties in with all these awesome services like VirusTotal and other online analysis services. You put your IOCs in there, and it will immediately give a report. Well, after a few seconds, give a report about are they found somewhere else. That kind of stuff, and then you can determine whether you're compromised and manage your whole workflow in the Hive there.
That's awesome. Yeah, now, is Security Onion on your radar in some of these clients as well?
Which one?
The Security Onion, so using Bro and some of the other analytics tools in that project.
Not that much actually. I'm aware of them. What I find is for Security Onion, you actually need a few hands, a few resources to properly manage them. What we try to do is make everything as automated as possible. I like Bro, I like Security Onion, but it's not something that we really use in the enterprise right now. By the clients that I work with.
Now, there are areas where you're pretty much always turning to a vendor for a solution.
Definitely firewalls. I don't want to spend hours and hours managing an open source firewall. That's definitely something I look at a vendor for. Antivirus, anti-malware, you don't want to mess with that because it's a control you have to use, but we also know that it's not a panacea, so it's not always going to work. So that's where I look for vendors as well.
Yeah, that's pretty much was in my recommendations as well, Wim. I have more questions for Wim around the virtual CISO.
Yes.
Carlos, go ahead.
Honor here. Now, typically when you go into these customers, how are you handling the interaction with people? Typically, when one goes in as an external resource into a company, one gets kind of a bit of pushback from some people in the organization itself and the structure. How do you work or you try to approach each different person across the organization and win them over? What has been your experience in terms of, has there been friction, no friction, or if there's been friction, what tools have you used that allow you to kind of get the message across and win them over?
Okay, I'm going to try to make that a not too long answer, but that could be like a discussion of an hour, right? The first thing to realize, if you come in as a virtual CISO, you report not to a director of IT or somebody in the lower layers of the organization. You report it to the COO, you report to the CEO. So you already have executive backing for your role, right? It's not a checkbox they want. They want somebody that comes in and handles their security. So you already have that buy-in on the highest level, which gives you trust on the lower levels as well. On the other hand, you have to gain the trust of all the department managers, everybody within the organization. And a system that I try to use is something they call goal question metric, where you basically ask what keeps the people up at night. And that's very different from for a manager of a sales team versus a manager of the IT team or a manager of the finance team. They have different concerns. They're all aligned in the business goals, but they have different concerns. So what you address with them and what you work on with them is defined by their issues, by their personal business goals, right? They're all small businesses within the business. So you basically ask their goals first. Then you're going to start defining questions that relate to those goals, and then you're going to identify metrics to answer the questions that were asked. And if you can address those separately and specifically for everybody's concerns, then you can build that report and prove that you are working for them and not against them.
I like that approach. Many times, one of the things that I see that causes quite a bit of friction is the external consultant goes in and says, "This is how you guys should be doing this. Let's work with you guys to have you guys work this way." And many times they don't spend the time to learn, hey, what are you trying to achieve? How do you work? How do you see yourself in the company? And then correlate that with how the company actually says that they fit inside of it. And that's something that even happens with pen tests and red teams. They just go like, I want a red team and here's the code, do the work. And you never see nobody from the red team going like, okay, how do you do your business? How do you make money? Same thing happens with the pen, even more with pen tests, where people really do not try to empathize and learn how the organization actually works to see how can they have the best impact or the best value.
Yeah, I remember, and I'm going to try to keep that story short, but many years ago, I was implementing a single sign-on solution for a hospital, and the IT team had decided that everybody needed to use a smart card. Now, I read a lot of stuff on the internet, sometimes informative stuff as well, and I had just read an article about an interior architect that was called into a hospital because they had just completely redesigned the hospital, and they found that the recovery times of the patients had gone up, right? So the first thing that the interior architect did was let himself be driven around the hospital in a bed, and he found out that the hospital was basically designed for the doctors, but there were a lot of stress factors for the patients. So when I came into the hospital, I remember that story, and I said, "This is not going to work because, for instance, people in the ICU, they need to be sterile, so they cannot touch a smart card and then put their password on a dirty keyboard because then they have to wash their hands again." In the end, we ended up with 5 methods of authentication. In the ICU, for instance, we had active RFID. When they walk into the room, the computer would automatically log on. Where, for instance, in the finance department, they retain the smart cards and they would put in a PIN code and authenticate that way. But what you said about understanding your users and understanding the organization, how they work, and what their goals are essential to implementing security correctly.
I think we lost sight of that, Wim, and I'm glad you kind of brought that concept back here on the show. I think it's great. So now, with respects to challenges, security challenges that might have commonalities between your clients, Wim, are there specific security challenges that you really just kind of rack your brain to solve in a really good way that is shared in common across your client base?
Third-party security management. I don't know what your experience is with it, but I work both on the vendor side and on the client side. There are these questionnaires that somebody, I think at a Big Four company, came up with. They are like 300, 400 questions that you send to a vendor, and they're basically cover your ass security. Because there is no methodology behind those questionnaires. So you fill them in. Somebody's going to read through them. Sometimes you get one or two questions back, but then it's basically when I come into the US, I have to sign. I have to fill in a paper where I say that I never engaged in terroristic activities. Right? That question is not there to see that I didn't engage in terroristic activities, but it's there to after the fact, if I have committed something to a terrorist act. That they can say you answered this question in the negative and you should have answered it in the positive, and it makes it easier for them to pick me out, right? And those questionnaires are the same thing. They basically go in the drawer of the legal department, and if I as a supplier get breached, they have the paper to come and say you told us you were secure and we trusted you, right? It's basically cover your ass. There's a lot of time spent on that, both on the vendor and on the client side. And we need to do it. There has to be a better way to do it.
Now, there are several vendors, commercial vendors in this space of third-party vendor risk management. What you're saying is you're not truly happy with all of them. And the follow-up question is, do some of them include some hands-on testing or get results from a penetration testing firm, for example? We talked about this on Enterprise Security Weekly as well.
I don't know any that does hands-on so penetration testing or even a vulnerability scan of a perimeter. I don't know any. You sometimes see that in merger and acquisitions projects, but not in product acquisition. Basically in the vendor relationship. I know of the different products. I've actually interacted with several of them. I think there is only one of the bigger players that actually publishes their algorithm for determining whether you're secure. Actually, most of these vendors make me really, really angry. They make me angry right now.
Yeah, I likened it to the days of like auditing, right? Where I was doing hands-on security at the university, and then audit would come over. And I mean, not audit is your friend. I learned audit is your friend, and that's fine. But like their approach was, well, we're just going to ask you a bunch of these questions, and then based on your answer, like that's going to develop a report. And actually, during that process, there was hands-on testing that we did. I then said, well, if you're going to ask these questions, I'm like Wim was saying, like anyone can say whatever they want. I'm like, so how is that secure? I'm like, what if we did some actual hands-on testing and blended that with the audit results?
You didn't get audited by me.
Yeah,
because
a lot of auditors do that. And what Wim and I were discussing was in assessing your third party, like the hands-on component is missing. I think where it segues, and Wim, I want to get your take on this before we go to the 5 questions, is what about, and this happens I think more in mergers and acquisitions, not so much with third parties, but you do an external digital footprint and you do passive vulnerability reconnaissance and you look in threat data. I won't list off vendors on this show because that's not the show for that, but there are a lot of vendors that offer that service, a lot of open source tools that can do a lot of that as well. What about that for assessing for mergers and then also applying that to third-party risk management?
I think it's useful, but for instance, if you're gonna do buy a software as a service product, then that external footprinting doesn't tell you anything about their development processes.
Yep.
Instead of asking 300 questions, I worked with one organization, and I cannot name their name because they're a client of mine. But the way they approached it was the best I've seen. What they did, the first thing they did was they needed a champion on the client side. So there needed to be somebody on the client side that said, we want to work with this vendor. And they were the single point of contact for us during the whole assessment process. And then they basically asked, I believe it were 8 questions instead of 300 that focused on the outcomes of our security processes more than checkbox, do you have this? Do you do this? Do you have that? It was really us of offering evidences of what we were doing. And that's the ideal way to do it, I believe.
Yeah, I definitely like that approach as well. I know also in acquisitions too, they will actually, I learned, run tools. Like if it's a software company buying a software company, they want to see the results of an open source scanning tool. So it scans the whole library for open source components, looks for vulnerabilities, lots of vendors in this space. They actually run that as part of the
I've seen that
to show
done.
due diligence on your software security, right?
I mean, that's a place to start too, where you just come up with if you have a list of scores that have to be obtained. I mean, that's not an unreasonable thing, especially if it's just a wide open space and you've got to have a place to start.
Yeah.
So it's not the end. But if you run a tool and you say, we're just not going to get involved in this if these scores all come in less than X, because that's where the real threat is. So you got to get your scores here.
But it has to be hands on keyboard, rubber meets the road.
Absolutely.
Testing.
I mean, and that's the next step. But you may just want to, it's like a filter where you want to go in and say, we're not even going to talk to you unless you could get scores to this level. I mean, until you're here, there's no point in us even talking.
And Wim, you and I share the same thoughts about if I assess the external posture, that doesn't tell me if they're doing secure code. Like just because someone, left a subdomain out there that, has some default thing on it or opened up an S3 bucket doesn't mean their software is secure or not.
Right.
Yeah. Agreed.
So Wim, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
I didn't know that this was coming, but I'm always ready.
All righty. Question 1, 3 words to describe yourself.
Boy. I think I'm focused, friendly, and that's difficult, man. So focused, friendly, and curious.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Probably a baseball bat.
If you wrote a book,
I was going to say my CISO, but
we didn't talk about certifications. We'll have to bring you back on, Wim, and talk about that.
No. I'm done at the end of this year. So
okay. But you were an ISC Squared board member for some time, helping improve that certification program.
Yeah. End of this year is my end as a board member.
Gotcha. So, Wim, if you were to write a book about yourself, what would the title be?
#Wimming.
I already knew that. Wim, in the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
First.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents. Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise. I guess other than fictional would be a real person, I guess. It's kind of weird how
fictional might be a little rough.
Fictional. Or otherwise.
Yeah, but fictional, you could just make something up,
Alien?
I guess.
Alien?
Okay.
Just two celebrities. That's all we need.
Tentacle monsters, I don't know.
No, I would definitely love to have Mila Kunis as my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
but then
nice.
Who would be my dad?
Wow, so usually it's the other way around, Wim. Usually people struggle with the mom.
A clone of Mila Kunis can be your dad. So
yeah, exactly.
There you go.
We are non-conformist. Mila Kunis can be both my mom and my dad.
I love it.
But one's a clone.
There you go.
One's a clone.
One's a clone, though.
Which is awesome.
We don't want anything illegal or unethical going on here.
Wim, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me.
And with that, we'll take a short break, come back, and we're going to bring on Chris Breton to talk about cool stuff on threat hunting. So stay tuned.